Hello there and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are the chairman of the political arm of Bell Pottinger and former Conservative MP Tim Collins and the deputy editor of The Guardian, Paul Johnson. Gents, it's good to have you both. Let's have a look at some of tomorrow morning's front pages. We're going to start with the FT. It leads on the story that Sir Philip Green has agreed to pay £363 million into the BHS pension fund. The Eye also picks up on that story, saying the news is better late than never. The Telegraph claims that children as young as 4 could be given sex education to warn them about the dangers of the internet. That's under new government plans. The Times reports on the inquest into the attack on tourists in Sousse in 2015, quoting a former Tunisian minister who says it's devastated the country. Also picking up on that story, The Guardian shows pictures of the victims and says their families plan to sue the holiday company they hold responsible. A new study linking obesity to 11 types of cancer makes the Daily Express's front page, while the Metro reports on a trial into whether a cancer surgeon removed women's breasts unnecessarily. And a pat on the back for Sir Philip Green from the Mail, along with claims that the government is revisiting changes that would see drivers' insurance premiums go up by several £100s. Tim, we're going to start with the Financial Times. Green says sorry and pays £363 million into insolvent BHS pension fund. That's a tenth of his net worth, apparently.
Well, I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the 500 million or so that he took out of the business 10 years or so ago, fair enough, it was making profits. If he'd stuck that 500 million pounds into a tracker fund, it would have doubled by now. So lots of people are saying he's paying back almost all the money he took out. I mean, actually, as a savvy investor, he's probably made an awful lot more out of that money than the money he's paid back. Having said which, I think the really interesting part of this story is because at the moment, nothing that he did seems to have been unlawful. There are questions, obviously, about whether the law should be changed for the future. But he probably didn't actually need to pay this money back. It was the fact he was trying to hang on to his knighthood that probably incentivised it. So all those people who were campaigning about his knighthood have secured a victory. And maybe actually it's worth, for all those pensioners, all those hundreds of millions of pounds that have been secured, maybe it was just as well he did have a knighthood after all.
Well, maybe, Paul, I mean, someone should tell David Beckham that's how much a knighthood costs.
Well, if you're asking the question, what's a knighthood worth, it looks like it was worth 363 million
exactly.
to Philip Green.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably now he's anticipating he gets his front row seat at London Fashion Road back. Presumably now he's anticipating when he rides around the Mediterranean his yacht, he won't be beleaguered by the media. I think the real test will come is whether the Daily Mail insist on calling him Sir Shifty in every headline that they write about Philip Green.
Right. I'm shuttling through now. We haven't got it. We haven't got it.
They must still be
How
deciding.
annoying is that? The one night we actually wanted to see the Daily Mail and we don't have it.
This has been a sodden, awful saga. He buys it in 2000 for £1. He sells it in 2015 to one Dominic Chappelle, a racing driver, bankrupt 3 times with no experience of retailing. You know, a light must have gone off in the background there. Meanwhile, 11,000 people have lost their jobs. 18,000 pensioners have lived in anxiety and anguish.
But they're getting something now, 88% of what they would have got otherwise, which is absolutely better than nothing. But the fact is, Tim, if I was a private a citizen who had a company, the company's in dire straits, I could sell it for £1 tomorrow, I could offload the pension fund and not worry about it. The same thing could happen tomorrow. No law's been changed.
And there is an issue as to whether the law should be different. I mean, the law as it was then was there under a Labour government. It wasn't changed under the coalition, wasn't changed under the Tories. So all 3 major parties have had some share in keeping the law as it has been. There is an issue as to whether it should be looked at again. I think there clearly is a case for it. But I do think the power of the shame, the power of the media, we often have stories about, is it a good thing that the media can be quite so intrusive, quite so vituperative, by far the most negative media in this country of anywhere in the world. But this is how it works. If this had been reported in almost any other country in the world, I think the person concerned would have just waltzed off, because it was the British media, they held them to account, they've got all this money for the pensioners.
But it's also illustrative in the way that political parties of almost any hue can be held in thrall to money, can't it? Tony Blair gave him a knighthood for services to industry. David Cameron gave him a job looking at government spending. And lo and behold, Philip Green decided there was a bit of waste there.
Yeah. If only there was another issue, Clive, where both Tony Blair and David Cameron have been on one side.
Yeah, that would
have been on another.
What was that?
I wonder what that was.
Yes. You can laugh now. You can laugh now. The Guardian, Tunisia. Paul. there was only ever going to be one verdict from the coroner unlawfully killed. The question is, any culpability potentially that the tour operator might have in it?
Yeah, that's the way some of the families are going now. I mean, the coroner was very, very decisive and didn't mince words on this. Said the responses of the security forces were shambolic at best and cowardly at worst, which to the survivors and to the relatives of those dead must have come as an awful hammer shock to hear that. They're now turning their attention on TUI, the company, to see if they were sort of negligent. This is a difficult thing. It revolves around quite complicated advice from the Foreign Office. They do 3 levels. Red, don't go there. Amber, be very, very careful, only go if essentially. And green, look up the advice. Well, the tour company didn't actually tell the people to look up the advice. And if they'd looked up the advice, it would have said there's a high level of terrorism activity.
But the company,
complicated.
But to be fair, the company does say that it was in the literature, but it was on the visa page of all the confirmation notes that were given to all of the travellers, and you don't need a visa for Tunisia.
You don't need a visa.
So you wouldn't see it, potentially.
It's horrific. I mean, the Guardian front page has got the photographs of the 30 victims, and I think that's a very striking way of bringing home that these are not numbers, these were people, these were all people who had loved ones whose lives have been devastated by what happened. And I think we always have to remember that side of it, the human side of it. The difficulty also is, although absolutely I agree with Paul that the coroner has done a splendid job and was very stark in some of the things he was saying, we have got to be so careful that we aren't so determined to blame the police in Tunisia, to blame the tour company that might or might not have provided better advice, or the Foreign Office. We mustn't forget that actually the person who was responsible for doing this was the terrorist, who of course was himself then shot at the end of it. The question is whether others could have done more, but the real blame lies with the terrorists and those who radicalised them.
Absolutely, but of course,
achieves the aim with tourism now down 95%.
90% as far as British tourists are concerned. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's go to the Telegraph. Tim, children aged 4 to learn the perils of the internet.
And this is the sort of story that I think will make every parent sort of think, this is so difficult, because you want your children to be protected, you want your children to have proper advice. The actual meat of the story is about saying that every school in the country, whether they're run by a local authority or a free school or whatever, will be required, certainly at secondary level, to have proper sex education and teach children about the importance of relationships and all this sort of thing. Absolutely all of that, I think, is entirely uncontroversial. The difficulty is, I think a lot of parents will be uncomfortable about the idea of children as young as 4 being taught anything about sex. On the other hand, the headline captures the point as well, that is that children that young, and indeed much younger, are now on the internet, on their tablets, on their phones, are going to come across stuff which is often very worrying and confusing to them and need to have somewhere to turn to. So it isn't easy, and I think those that say either on the one hand children that young should absolutely be kept away from any sex education, I don't agree with that, but equally on the other hand, those that want to expose the genuinely childlike and innocent to things that they don't need to see, I think that would be wrong as well. We've got to find a proper way through the middle.
Indeed, Paul. I mean, there has to be a holistic approach to this, doesn't there? I mean, it has to be everyone's responsibility, not just people at home and the parents, but schools as well. In fact, you know, most kids spend, what is it, 2/3 of their time at school or something, if you add it all up. So as a result, those institutions have got a duty of care in this respect, haven't they?
I mean, the 4 in the headline is slightly dramatic, but I mean, there was a time when the question was, you know, did you learn about sex education from teacher or parent? The answer now is invariably from the web.
Right.
And I think there's a graduated sort of response here. I mean, sex education is only sort of compulsory in local authority-run schools, secondary schools. So this has now broadened it out. But if you're talking about the perils of relationships, if you're talking about aggressive relationships, if you're talking about what does consent mean, if you're talking about sexting, if you're talking about that whole array of things that we've become so aware of and so worried about, then this is surely a very, very creative way and sensible way of going about it.
Sure, but controversial, and I'm sure it's a story that's going to run for a while. Staying with the Telegraph, story that's going to be running for a while as well. Tim, I'm turning straight to you on this. UKIP's Carswell in secret talks to rejoin the Conservatives. Are you going to have him back? Would you like him back?
I think that would be over the dead body of quite a lot of people in the Conservative Party.
An extra notch on the old majority.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to be clear, I think it's no great secret to you, Clive. I supported Vote Leave in the referendum and delighted by the result. I actually do genuinely think, even though I fought UKIP and UKIP were probably more responsible than anybody else for turfing me out of Parliament, I do think that Nigel Farage deserved to get a peerage and that 4 million voters should be represented better than they are in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. But if you defect from one party to another, I don't think you have really the right to defect back. The only person, as I can think of, ever did it was Winston Churchill. And the truth is, Douglas Carswell is not Winston Churchill.
I think what you can sum up what's happening in UKIP at the moment, despite that staggering thing from Tim advising that Nigel Farage should be made a peer. I mean, Farage wants Carswell out because Carswell couldn't get him a knight to it. Carswell thinks Farage is a bit of a joke and is worth only an MBE. Meanwhile, Aaron Banks, the UKIP funder, says he's going to take on Carswell in his own constituency and force him out. Meanwhile, Farage is attacking the current leader, Paul Nuttall, who he says he doesn't talk firmly enough about immigration. And Paul Nuttall, well, he's gone missing. So that essentially is
my favourite line in this story, which actually carries on inside the paper, is that UKIP have contemplated taking the whip away from Douglas Carswell, but they can't do that because that would require a vote of the Parliamentary Party, and he's all of it.
That's Douglas Carswell. He is the Parliamentary Party. But, I mean, UKIP, they are, quite frankly, in achieving their aim, the most successful political party in this country at the moment, and they're in complete disarray now, aren't they?
And yet, if we believe the opinion polls, it's made next to no difference to their support. Whereas Labour support's cratered, Lib Dem support's gone up, Tory support's gone up, UKIP support's about exactly the same as it was at the general election. There are still 3 or 4 million people out there who think, confronted with all the political choices, UKIP is still closer to them than to anybody else.
All right.
But this is the sort of calibre of some of the people, who've got us to the edge of the ruinous Brexit. We're about to enter the hard Brexit that Tim and Douglas Carswell, his ideological mate,
anybody would have thought this was sort of
wonderful.
Planned, Paul. Just as well, we're about to go on, Clive, to a story.
And I'm going to start with Paul on this.
Ruinous Brexit.
Dyson challenges tech giants with huge investment in Britain. And Mr. Dyson, he's a Brexiteer, right?
He supported it,
he supported
absolutely.
Brexit, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think he's Sir James, actually.
So, indeed. So, Sir James, to you, Paul, he's investing in this country. Brexit's going to be a success. And it's people like you, dodgy lefties like you, who want to knock it over.
Clive, come on, you've exceeded.
We'll forgive him the tautology. Well done, Clive.
I thought that the balance of the BBC presenter has just been sort of slightly tipped over the edge there, Clive.
No, I thought it was very well, actually.
I think this is quite interesting. There's lots and lots of movements going down. So any form of Edenwood investment is judged as a triumph. Any sort of question mark is judged as very, very dubious. So what we've had in the past couple of days is the possibility of the electronic Mini going to Germany. We've had question marks over Nissan investment. We've had messages from the banks such as HSBC, etc. We've had warnings from many of the principal investment companies and the insurance companies over Brexit itself. We're in a very perilous situation here at the moment.
But the story, Dyson is investing in Britain.
Yes, well, huge investment, billions of pounds he's bringing in. Google's invested, Facebook's invested, Apple's invested. They're all coming in.
That's lovely. And Google and Facebook and Apple, the tax revenues we'll get from them will be...
Well, given that they're creating thousands of jobs in the UK, all those people will be paying taxes. Some of them might even earn enough to buy The Guardian.
But Tim...
Not for sale,
Tim.
Not for sale.
OK.
Giving away free now, is it?
Tim, this is an investment, there's a question about that. But Paul points out that dodgy right-wingers like you I got the balance there. Got the balance there. Are just a little bit too sunny. We heard Sir John Major yesterday point out that the truth needs to be told about Brexit.
Well, first of all, Clive, I am delighted, having spent sort of 20 years in the Conservative Party where we were always accused of being the doom merchants and gloomy. I'm delighted that people now think the right of British politics is sunny. Cheerful, happy, talking about how wonderful the world is. But I agree, I am a natural optimist. I do actually think things will get better. You know what? During the last referendum campaign last year, I think it would be fair to say, I think we could all agree about this, there were some fairly large porky pies told by people on both sides. Okay.
Indeed.
One person, however, who clearly told the truth all the way through was James Dyson, because I looked him up. 2 weeks before the referendum, he said, if we vote for Brexit, jobs and investment will come to the UK. And he's done his bit, £2.5 billion announced today.
All right, OK. Talking about porky pies, to the Express, Trump gives himself a C for communication. So the fact that a number of federal judges have thrown out one of his signature policies, executive orders, has nothing to do with it being unconstitutional, Paul. It's because he just didn't sell it properly.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, isn't it?
Well, that's what he's saying.
I'm looking at that C rather hard and thinking you could slide about 20 letters down the alphabet quite easily there. I wonder what he gives himself for international relations. I wonder what he gives himself
Diplomacy.
for diplomacy, diversity,
A++.
foreign aid, environmental programmes. The list is getting longer. But the A for effort was quite interesting.
Yeah.
A for effort?
Was it A for effort? Yes, it was A for accomplishments.
A for accomplishment, A for effort, and C for communication. It's his self.
Right. Okay. So he just needs to tune up the sort of the messaging. He should talk to you guys, actually. You know, so he probably is talking to you guys. That's probably it.
A for services to Twitter.
All right. Very, very, very briefly. I know I'm being told to shut up, but very briefly. Obama's memoirs are costing. He's managed to sell them, or he's going to be selling them for 60 million quid, apparently, according to the FT.
Yeah.
Well, there's one person in London who must be looking at that story and feeling very, very sick.
David Cameron, because he didn't quite get the millions that he was hoping for. Front page of the Financial Times. All right.
President Obama's a best-selling author anyway.
All right. OK, we're going to have to end it there. Guys, Paul, Tim, it's good to have you and look at some of the stories behind the headlines. Many, many thanks for that. That's it from the papers. Thanks to you for watching as well. Don't forget, you can see the front pages of the papers online on the BBC News website. It's there for you 7 days a week at bbc.co.uk/papers. And if you've missed the programme any evening, you can watch it on iPlayer. Thanks to Paul and Tim again for coming in, and to you for watching. Bye-bye.